When most of us think about getting ready for some kind of crisis, the image that probably pops up is hunkering down at home,
Yeah.
right? Surrounded by supplies.
That's the standard picture, definitely.
But what if the CIA, the experts in navigating uncertain situations, teach the exact opposite?
Mm.
Get ready, because this deep dive is, well, it's probably going to flip your whole understanding of preparedness on its head. We're looking at some really unconventional survival strategies, straight from CIA methods.
Yeah, and it's not what you'd expect, not the basement bunker stuff at all.
Not at all.
Our main source here is a really interesting discussion with Andrew Bustamante, who's a former CIA officer, and he lays out some critical mistakes people often make when they think about survival.
Okay.
But the fascinating part is these ideas aren't just for doomsday scenarios.
Yeah.
They actually offer a really useful lens for handling all sorts of unexpected things life throws at you.
Exactly. So forget the usual prepper shows or blogs for a minute. We're tapping into some pretty high-level strategic thinking here.
Yeah.
And the goal isn't to scare anyone. It's more about unlocking a different kind of awareness. The kind that leads to those real aha moments,
Right.
whatever situation you might face. Okay, let's dive in. Starting with that big one that really made me stop and think. The whole myth of sheltering in place.
Yeah. This is fundamental to their training, apparently. Yeah. The core principle is never shelter in place.
Never. That goes against pretty much everything you usually hear.
It does. And the reasoning is, well, pretty straightforward when you think about it. If you stay put, you are completely reliant on the resources you have right there.
Okay.
And those resources are finite. They diminish over time. Food runs out. Water runs out.
And you become more vulnerable, especially if it's a big disaster and help isn't coming quickly.
Precisely. You're essentially creating a timeline for your own failure. So the CIA insight is that preparedness needs to be active. It needs to be mobile, not just sitting passively on a pile of supplies.
So it's the total opposite of digging in and fortifying a position.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Avoid becoming that fixed target with dwindling supplies.
It actually makes a lot of sense when you frame it that way. Instead of being stuck with just what you managed to hoard, the emphasis is on mobility.
Yeah.
Let's carry what's essential, sure. But the real strategy is being able to continuously acquire new resources as you move.
Yeah, the source uses a good analogy, handgun ammo.
Yep.
The typical prepper might focus on stockpiling, say, thousands of 9mm rounds in one place.
Right.
The CIA perspective is more about being mobile, carrying what you need now, but also knowing how to find and collect more ammo, maybe from different locations or sources you encounter while you're on the move.
It's dynamic, adaptable.
Much more dynamic, yeah. And probably more resilient in the long run.
Okay, so the bunker's out, mobility is in. That leads us naturally to bug-out bags, right? But it sounds like it's not just one bag. There are different levels, tiers.
That's right. The source breaks it down into 3 distinct tiers, which is really useful. Each one is for a different kind of scenario, a different time frame.
Okay, what's the first level?
First up is the 24-hour bag. This is all about immediate survivability.
Just getting through the next day.
Basically, yeah, getting you safely from right now until, say, noon tomorrow. The key idea here is it needs to be super lightweight, something you can grab instantly for short-term needs.
So what goes in that? Just the absolute must-haves.
Pretty much. Water is number 1. Some very portable food energy bars, maybe. And importantly, a change of footwear and basic clothes.
Why the clothes and shoes specifically?
For temperature changes, getting wet, basic comfort and function to keep moving. It's not about being comfortable for days, just getting through that initial escape or disruption.
Right, makes sense. So like a sudden tornado warning where you actually have an escape route. Or maybe a local power outage in really bad weather, just needing to get somewhere else for the night.
Exactly, those kinds of things. And what's interesting is the emphasis on keeping it small and light enough that you could move a whole family quickly. The example given was being able to grab it, get on a plane in one city, and just deplane in another, no fuss. Speed and mobility are paramount.
Got it. Okay, so that's tier 1. What's tier 2? The 72-hour bag.
Yep, the 72-hour bag. This one's designed for a slightly longer displacement.
Like something bigger is happening, and it might take up to 3 days to get somewhere properly safe.
Precisely. Think situations like a hurricane warning, major flooding, where you might be displaced from your home and end up in a temporary public shelter, like a stadium or school gym.
Okay, so the purpose shifts slightly. More towards sustaining yourself while you're in transit or temporary accommodation.
Exactly. So the contents need to reflect that longer duration and potentially more exposure.
What gets added then compared to the 24-hour bag?
You'd want more cash, for sure. Importantly, some basic sleepwear, maybe another change of daily clothes just for hygiene and basic comfort over 3 days.
Things you wouldn't bother with for just one night.
Right. And then things like sunscreen, sun protection, maybe a hat become more relevant if you might be outside or exposed. A simple raincoat or poncho, too.
Yeah.
Basically, better protection from the elements over that medium term.
Okay, 24-hour for immediate escape, 72-hour for surviving a few days of displacement while getting to safety. What about the third level, the full-on escape? That sounds significant.
It is. This is the scenario where you're looking at leaving your home, your property, potentially for good, or at least for an unknown extended period. Think massive, widespread disasters.
Wow. Okay, so what's the approach there? Is it just a bigger bag?
Well, two things are critical here, according to the source. First, you'd still rely on that well-packed 72-hour bag for your immediate survival needs: food, water, clothes, etc.
Right.
But the crucial addition, the thing that defines this level, is having all your vital documents ready to go, instantly accessible.
You mean things like passports, birth certificates, social security cards, maybe property deeds, stuff that's a nightmare to replace.
Exactly those. The really irreplaceable stuff. The recommendation is keep these in a fire-safe box or container.
Makes sense.
And ideally, that container should also be portable. They mentioned maybe a fire-safe bag kept inside a larger home safe so you can just grab the bag.
So you can take the essentials even if the house itself is compromised.
Right, and this acknowledges a really tough reality. In that kind of situation, you might lose your physical property. You have to accept that possibility and prioritize saving yourselves and having the means to relocate and rebuild your life elsewhere.
That's a huge mental shift, prioritizing survival and future identity over possessions.
Oh.
Okay. But knowing when to pull the trigger on that kind of full-on escape, that feels like the hardest part. How do you identify that tipping point?
That's a fantastic question, and the source offers a really insightful take, drawing on, historical precedents. The key advice is don't wait for some obvious, universally agreed upon tipping point. Because by the time everyone agrees it's time to leave, it might already be too crowded, too chaotic, too late. The roads could be jammed, resources gone.
So you need to be ahead of the curve. Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. That's the core insight. Proactive anticipation.
So what's the strategy then? If you're not waiting for a clear signal, the source mentions setting dates.
Yeah, it's about setting your own trigger points.
Yeah.
The recommendation is to actually put dates on your calendar well in advance.
Like milestones?
Sort of. An initial check-in date just to assess how things are developing. Then maybe a midpoint date for a more serious evaluation, like do we need to move to the next stage of readiness? And finally, a drop-dead date.
A point where you decide, okay, regardless of what everyone else is doing, we are taking action now.
Precisely. Whether the tipping point is obvious to the masses or not, it's about your personal assessment reaching its predetermined threshold.
The speaker in the source even gave a personal example, right? About his own timeline for potentially leaving the U.S.
He did. He mentioned initially having a 5 to 7 year window based on his analysis, and how, interestingly, business opportunities later shifted that calculus for him personally.
But the principle holds. Having that forward-looking plan, those decision points.
Absolutely. And observing the situation, potentially from a safer distance if you make your move early. The analogy used was great. Observing the field from the stands.
Ah, like watching the game unfold instead of being caught in the middle of the scrum.
Exactly. By anticipating and positioning yourself ahead of time, maybe even relocating earlier based on your assessment, you gain perspective, flexibility, and way more options than if you wait until you're forced to react in the middle of the chaos.
That makes a lot of sense. A much more strategic way to approach potentially life-altering decisions.
Okay.
Well, let's shift gears a bit. The source also gets into the intelligence world itself, which is often murky for outsiders. Can you help clarify the differences between the big agencies? CIA, NSA, FBI? People tend to lump them together.
Yeah, that's common, but they have really distinct roles. It's crucial to understand they're all part of what's called the intelligence community, or IC. There are actually about 18 different agencies in the US IC.
18? Wow. Okay.
And each one is primarily defined by two things. Its purpose, what kind of intelligence it's meant to collect, and its authorities.
Authorities meaning what they're legally allowed to do.
Exactly. Permissions granted by the executive branch, especially around privacy issues. These authorities dictate what they can collect and from whom. This is a really important point. For instance, the CIA's authorities strictly prohibit them from targeting U.S. citizens for intelligence collection.
Okay, so let's break down the big three then. CIA's main job.
CIA is primarily focused on human intelligence. Human,
people talking to people.
Basically, yeah. Gathering secret information from human sources, spies, assets located in foreign countries. The key is that it's overseas, gathering info relevant to U.S. national security.
Got it. Foreign human. What about the NSA? They're the tech guys, right?
Largely, yes. The National Security Agency focuses on signals intelligence. A SIGINT.
Listening to electronic communications.
Right. Collecting secrets from electronic signals, radio waves, fiber optic cables, satellite transmissions, encrypted data. So where CIA deals with human sources, NSA deals with electronic signals. Again, usually foreign ones.
Okay. And the FBI. Most people know them from movies, dealing with crimes inside the U.S.
That's generally right. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's main role is domestic. They investigate threats inside the U.S. homeland. That includes threats from foreign powers operating within the U.S., but also domestic threats like terrorism or major federal crimes.
So that difference in legal authorities is key, especially for privacy. The source really emphasized what the CIA can't do.
Absolutely critical. The source states very clearly, the CIA has no legal authority to collect intelligence on U.S. citizens. Period. That's a fundamental legal line.
So the example used was, like, a U.S. citizen gets radicalized online, joins ISIS.
Right. Even though that person is now a threat, the CIA can't target them for intelligence collection. That would fall to the FBI because the person is a U.S. citizen and the potential threat activity is likely within or related to the U.S. homeland.
That's a really important distinction people often miss. Okay, so with all these different agencies, different focuses, different rules, it seems like getting them to work together to share information effectively might be challenging.
Oh, definitely. The source touches on this, and it's a well-known issue within the intelligence world.
Why is it so hard?
The analogy used in the source is actually pretty good. Think about a big company. Does the HR department speak the exact same language as the sales department?
Probably not. Different priorities, different jargon.
Exactly. Same thing, but maybe even more pronounced in the IC. Each agency has its own culture, its own priorities, its own way of doing things, its own specialized terminology.
So even if Agency A has a piece of intel that could be vital to Agency B,
Agency B might not easily understand it, or it might not fit into their own systems or current priorities. An analyst gets a report from another agency, and if it's not immediately clear or relevant to their specific tasking,
it might get put on the back burner.
it's a natural human tendency, unfortunately, and each agency generates so much of its own intelligence, they tend to focus inward on what they know and understand best. Valuable pieces from outside can sometimes get overlooked or misinterpreted.
Sounds like a massive bureaucratic challenge in a field where timely sharing seems absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about how intelligence itself has evolved. The source mentioned a shift. It used to be mainly a wartime thing, but now it's constant.
Yeah, historically, looking back before World War I, major intelligence operations, espionage really ramped up during wars, and then when peace came, they'd scale back significantly.
Makes sense.
But after World War I, World War II, and especially after 9/11, there's been this trend of continuous expansion and operation of intelligence agencies. Even in peacetime, they don't really scale down anymore.
And that constant pervasive presence obviously fuels a lot of conspiracy theories, doesn't it? Like a hidden hand controlling things. The source mentions these theories exist, but doesn't really engage with them directly.
All right, it acknowledges they're out there, but offers a different frame for understanding this continuous peacetime intelligence activity.
Which is?
It uses a business lens, which is interesting. Think about why big corporations pour money into business intelligence, market research, competitor analysis.
To stay ahead, right.
Yeah.
To know what competitors are doing, protect their market share, avoid getting blindsided.
Exactly. The argument is that national intelligence agencies, in peacetime, serve a similar function on a global scale. It's about strategic advantage.
So by gathering intelligence constantly, nations can try to anticipate moves by rivals, deter conflicts, maneuver strategically, or basically try to avoid getting into costly, destructive hot wars.
That's the idea presented. That robust peacetime intelligence allows for proactive maneuvering and deterrence. It's seen as, arguably, a more cost-effective way to maintain stability and protect national interests than waiting for conflicts to erupt and then reacting.
Using intel to prevent bigger fights. An uneasy peace maintained by constant vigilance. It's definitely a less sensational way to look at it.
Okay, let's talk about the speaker himself, Andrew Bustamante. His background, leaving the CIA, it sounds like his whole identity was fake while undercover.
Yeah, that's standard for deep cover work. You have a completely fabricated identity, background, resume everything. It's essential for safety in the mission.
And even after leaving, he's still bound by secrecy.
Absolutely. A
Yeah.
lifetime secrecy agreement. He's legally forbidden from ever revealing classified methods or, crucially, the identities of sources or ongoing operations. That never goes away.
So even though he runs his own company now, Everyday Spy, he has these serious legal lines he can't cross about his past work. Precisely. The source is clear. While that legal obligation remains, there's no current operational link between him or his company and the CIA. Everyday Spy was created specifically to take what he considers the valuable best practices from the CIA.
Especially the psychological tools and strategic thinking.
Right. And bring those to the public for use in everyday life.
Applying spy techniques to,
Yeah.
what, getting a raise, dating?
Kind of, yeah. He mentions areas like mindset, physical health, career advancement, romance, personal security. The core idea is taking these high-stakes psychological principles learned at the farm, the CIA training center, and making them practical for regular challenges.
Interesting. So it's not just about gadgets and fighting.
Not at all. The methodology seems deeply psychological. He talks about aiming for lasting behavioral change, not just giving people information they'll forget. He contrasted like reading a 250-page book and maybe remembering one thing
Right.
versus the CIA training goal, which is for trainees to really internalize and be able to use a huge amount of that knowledge and skill, like getting 250 nuggets out of that 250-page book.
That's a high bar. And his relationship with the agency now. He's independent, but would he help them if asked?
He emphasizes his independence, that his views aren't CIA sanctioned, but he also says, yeah, if asked, he'd consider helping, driven by patriotism and belief in the mission.
But not just jumping back in.
No, he frames even that possibility almost like a business negotiation, acknowledging it would impact his current life and work. So it's complex.
It really paints a picture of a duty felt, but also a clear separation now.
Yeah, and it highlights how deep the psychological training must go at the CIA, that it's applicable to so many areas. He even mentions improving airplane security or interpersonal dynamics. It's far beyond the James Bond stuff.
Even mentioning a book called Sex and Spies,
Yeah.
applying these principles very broadly.
It certainly shows the wide range of application he sees for these core ideas.
Definitely a much richer, more psychological world than we usually imagine. Okay, as we wrap up this really fascinating deep dive, what are the big takeaways for you, the things that really stand out?
Well, for me, several things. First, that huge mindset shift about mobility, prioritizing adaptability over just bunkering down, that's massive.
Yeah, the never shelter in place idea.
Right. Then the tiered approach to bug out bags having different levels of readiness for different scales of problems, that seems really practical.
Mhm.
Also, the whole idea of proactive anticipation. Setting your own triggers, not waiting for the obvious crisis point, that feels very strategic.
The view from the stands.
Exactly. And maybe the most surprising thing is just how relevant those core CIA psychological principles seem to be, not just for spying, but for navigating everyday life more effectively.
It really does make you question your basic assumptions about preparedness, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Considering everything we've discussed, this emphasis on adaptability, on continuous learning, on psychological resilience, how might you reevaluate your own approach to being prepared?
Not just for the big disasters, right?
It's exactly. Prepared for the unexpected challenges, big and small, that life throws your way. This deep dive certainly suggests that cultivating strategic thinking and being open to these unconventional perspectives might give you a real edge, whatever comes next.